The slap that changed everything. The courtroom was silent. Papers shuffled. Lawyers whispered. Just another Tuesday morning in county court. Then came the sound that shattered everything. Crack. A palm striking flesh. Hard. Vicious. Deliberate. The black woman's head snapped sideways. Documents exploded from her hands like startled birds. Chairs scraped against tile as people lurched backward in shock. But here's what nobody expected. She didn't fall. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. Instead, Amara lifted her chin. Her dark eyes locked onto the officer who'd just struck her. And when she spoke, her voice was steady as steel. "You just assaulted an officer of the court." Officer Daniels laughed. Actually laughed. His hands still tingled from the impact, his face twisted with disgust. "You? An officer of the court? Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courtrooms." The gallery erupted. Shouts. Gasps. Someone's phone clattered to the floor. But Amara stood perfectly still. Have you ever witnessed a moment that changes everything? Comment, yes, if you've seen injustice this raw. Because what happened next, nobody saw coming. The presiding judge, a white man in his 60s who'd been silent throughout the chaos, slowly rose from his bench. His gavel trembled in his weathered hand. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Bailiffs, stand down immediately." Daniels smirked. The same arrogant expression he'd worn for 20 years of unchecked power. "Judge Morrison, this woman was disrupting." Silence. Morrison's voice boomed through the courtroom. Every breath held. Every heart stopped. Today is Judge Amara Johnson's first day presiding over this court. "Ms. Johnson." He paused, his eyes finding hers across the chaos. "Please take your rightful seat." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was deafening. Daniels's face drained of color. The smirk melted like wax. His hand, the same hand that had struck her, began to shake. But Amara? She smiled. Not a bitter smile. Not a vindictive grin. The quiet, devastating smile of someone who'd been underestimated their entire life. And was about to prove exactly why that was a mistake. "Thank you, Judge Morrison." She straightened her blazer. Smoothed down papers that moments ago had been scattered like confetti. And began walking toward the bench. Each step echoed through the courtroom like a countdown. Click. 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 The same courtroom that had witnessed her humiliation was about to witness her ascension. The same officer who thought he could break her spirit was about to learn what real power looked like. The same system that had tried to crush her dreams was about to feel the weight of justice. But this is only the beginning. What would you do if someone slapped you in front of 50 people? Most of us would crumble. Most of us would break. Amara Johnson wasn't most people. Subscribe now. Because the revenge she's about to serve is absolutely biblical. And if you're not following along, you'll miss how one woman turned 20 years of injustice into the most satisfying courtroom victory ever recorded. Still not convinced? Drop a comment telling me why you won't subscribe. I dare you. Because in 60 seconds, you're going to watch Officer Daniels realize he just made the biggest mistake of his life. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when the powerless become powerful. The gavel is about to fall. And when it does, everything changes forever. But before Amara became the woman who could silence a courtroom with 6 words, she was just an 8-year-old girl hiding behind her mother's skirt. The night everything changed started with 3 sharp knocks. Bam. 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 Not the polite tap of neighbors. Not the gentle rap of friends. The authoritative pounding that makes your stomach drop before you even see the badges. Little Amara pressed her face against the cool window glass, watching red and blue lights paint her neighborhood in colors of crisis. 4 squad cars. 8 officers. All for one man who'd never hurt a soul. Her father, Marcus Johnson, opened the door in his pajamas. Still had toothpaste foam on his chin from brushing his teeth. Still smelled like the bedtime story he'd just finished reading her. "Marcus Johnson, you're under arrest for armed robbery of First National Bank." The words hit like sledgehammers. Amara watched her father, 6'2" of gentle strength who caught spiders to release them outside, drop to his knees without resistance. His hands shook as the cuffs clicked into place. "There's been a mistake," he whispered. "I was home all evening. Amara can tell you, we were reading Charlotte's Web." The lead officer laughed. Actually laughed. "Sure you were. Tell it to the jury, boy. That word. Boy. Spat like poison at a man who coached Little League, volunteered at soup kitchens, and hadn't missed a day of work in 12 years. Amara's mother, Denise, grabbed her daughter's hand so tight it hurt. But not as much as watching her father, her gentle giant, being paraded past neighbors like a trophy. The officer's radio crackled, "We got him. The suspect is in custody." Suspect. Not allegedly. Not possibly. Guilty before proven innocent. As the taillights disappeared into darkness, Denise Johnson did something that would change everything. She walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a thick, leather-bound law book, and placed it in her 8-year-old daughter's trembling hands. The book was heavy. Heavier than any bedtime story. Heavier than childhood itself. "Learn this, baby," her mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Learn every word, every rule, every loophole. Because they'll never expect you to know more than they do." Amara's small fingers traced the gold letters. Constitutional law. "But Mom, I can barely read the big words." "Then we'll learn together. Every night. Until you can speak their language better than they can." And they did. For 3 years, while Marcus Johnson sat in a cell for a crime he didn't commit, mother and daughter studied by lamplight. Denise worked double shifts at the hospital, but every evening found them hunched over law books, turning pages like prayers. What they discovered broke Amara's heart and forged her soul. The witness who identified her father. Cross-eyed and admittedly unsure. The evidence. Circumstantial at best. The lawyer assigned to defend him. Fresh out of law school, overwhelmed, and clearly outmatched. Her father wasn't convicted because he was guilty. He was convicted because he was black, poor, and had nobody who knew how to fight back. But his daughter? His daughter was learning. Every statute. Every precedent. Every loophole the system used to crush people like her family. She memorized Miranda rights before multiplication tables. Studied search and seizure laws instead of fairy tales. The transformation was just beginning. By age 16, Amara had memorized more legal precedents than most law students. But the world didn't see brilliance when she walked through doors. They saw threat. The whispers started the moment she entered Lincoln High's honors classes. White parents clutched their purses tighter. Teachers spoke slower, assuming she couldn't keep up. Guidance counselors steered her toward practical courses like cosmetology and food service. College isn't for everyone, dear. Maybe consider a trade. But Amara had learned something powerful from those late-night law books. Knowledge was a weapon they couldn't confiscate. While classmates gossiped about weekend parties, she dissected Supreme Court cases. While they worried about prom dates, she studied constitutional amendments. Every slight, every assumption, every "you people" comment got filed away like evidence. Store managers followed her through aisles, assuming sticky fingers. Security guards watched her every move, waiting for confirmation of their prejudice. Even buying a pack of gum became an interrogation. "Where'd you get the money for this?" Is this really yours? I need to see some ID. For a candy bar. From a 16-year-old honor student. But the worst came during senior year. Mrs. Patterson, AP History, the teacher everyone called Iron Maiden for her legendary toughness. Students feared her pop quizzes. Parents complained about her impossible standards. Amara loved her. Until the day Patterson handed back essays on constitutional law. 28 papers returned. 27 students got theirs back with grades and comments. Amara's desk remained empty. Ms. Johnson, please see me after class. The room cleared. Amara approached the desk, heart hammering but spine straight. Patterson held up the essay. 12 pages of meticulous research, flawless citations, arguments that would make law professors weep with pride. Did you write this yourself? The question hit like a physical blow. Excuse me. This level of legal analysis, it's graduate-level work. I need to know if you had help. Amara's hands trembled. Not with fear. With rage so pure it could have lit fires. Are you asking because the work is too good, or because you think I'm too stupid to have written it? Patterson's face flushed. I'm not saying. You're saying exactly that. Amara's voice never rose above a whisper, but it carried the weight of earthquakes. You're saying a black girl from the East Side couldn't possibly understand constitutional law well enough to write at this level. Now that's not. Let me save you the investigation. Amara opened her backpack, pulled out a worn legal pad covered in her handwriting. Notes. Outlines. Research citations in her careful script. Every source I used. Every argument I developed. Every word I wrote myself. She placed the notebook on Patterson's desk like evidence in a trial. But here's what's really interesting, Mrs. Patterson. Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act states that any person who, under color of state authority, deprives another of constitutional rights can be held liable for damages. Patterson's mouth fell open. As a public school teacher, you're a state actor. Accusing me of academic dishonesty based solely on racial assumptions? That's deprivation of my right to equal educational opportunity. The teacher's face went pale. I could file a federal lawsuit. Demand an investigation. Call the ACLU. Make this a very public conversation about racial bias in education. Amara picked up her notebook, shouldered her backpack. Or you could grade my essay fairly and remember that brilliance doesn't have a color. She turned toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Mrs. Patterson. Next time you want to question whether a student is smart enough for their own work, maybe check their transcript first. I have a 4.0 GPA and I've been accepted to Harvard Law with a full scholarship. The door clicked shut behind her. Patterson stared at the essay for a long time. Then she picked up her red pen and wrote at the top. A+. Exceptional work. But the damage was done. Another brick in the wall Amara was building around her heart. Another reason to prove them all wrong. The girl walking out of that classroom wasn't just angry. She was dangerous. Harvard Law acceptance letter still warm in her passenger seat. Constitutional law textbook stacked neatly in her back seat. A future brighter than anything her family had dared dream. Then came the red and blue lights. Whoop whoop. Amara checked her speedometer. 35 in a 35 zone. Signal working. Registration current. Nothing wrong except the color of her skin on the wrong side of town. She pulled over, hands visible on the steering wheel, just like her father taught her before they took him away. The officer who approached her window wore a badge that read, Daniels. 20-something, cocky swagger, hand resting on his weapon like he expected war. The same Daniels who would slap her years later. But tonight, he was just another predator in uniform. License and registration. Amara complied, movements slow and deliberate. "Officer, may I ask why you stopped me?" Broken taillight. She knew it was a lie. Had checked her car that morning like she did every morning. But arguing with armed authority was a luxury black women couldn't afford. "Step out of the vehicle." "Sir, is that necessary?" "I haven't." "Now." The shout echoed through empty streets. Amara's hands trembled as she opened the door, Harvard dreams suddenly feeling very far away. Daniel circled her like a vulture. His partner, Officer Cruz, emerged from the squad car with a flashlight that cut through darkness like an accusation. "Hands behind your back." "For what?" "I haven't done anything wrong." "Resisting arrest." "I'm not resisting anything." "You haven't even told me what." The push came without warning. Amara stumbled forward, skinning her palms on rough asphalt. Pain shot through her knees as they hit concrete. "Stop fighting." Daniel shouted, loud enough for any nearby cameras to hear. But she wasn't fighting. Wasn't resisting. Was just trying to breathe while two grown men pressed her face into the street like she was less than human. The cuffs bit into her wrists. Too tight. Deliberately tight. Cutting off circulation, leaving marks that would last for weeks. "What's this?" Cruz held up her Harvard acceptance letter, now torn from being yanked out of the car. "Harvard Law." "You." Both officers laughed. Actual laughter while her dreams crumpled in his hands. "Affirmative action strikes again," Daniels sneered. "Probably can't even spell Constitution." They searched her car like she was Pablo Escobar. Ripped apart her carefully organized textbooks. Scattered her notes across the street. Treated her belongings like garbage because they saw her as garbage. Found nothing, of course. Because there was nothing to find. But that didn't matter. "Drugs in the vehicle," Cruz announced into his radio. Amara's blood turned to ice. "There are no drugs in my car." "Funny how they always deny it," Daniels muttered, pulling a small baggie from his pocket. "Plant evidence. Frame an innocent woman. Destroy a future because he could." At the station, they processed her like meat. Fingerprints. Mugshots. A cage that smelled like vomit and despair. Other women in similar situations, all black, all poor, all trapped in the same system designed to devour them. One phone call, the desk sergeant grunted. She called her mother. Tried to explain through tears and rage that her perfect record, her perfect grades, her perfect future had just been shredded by two men who saw sport in destruction. "Baby, we'll figure this out," Denise whispered. "We'll fight this." But how do you fight lies backed by badges? How do you prove innocence when the system profits from guilt? The holding cell was freezing. Fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps. Amara pressed her back against cold concrete and made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't just fight this case. She would learn to fight every case. Every time they tried to break someone like her. Every time they planted evidence. Every time they counted on victims being too poor, too scared, too powerless to push back. She would become their worst nightmare, a black woman who knew the law better than they did. The girl who entered that cell was Harvard-bound and hopeful. The woman who would leave was something else entirely. Something dangerous. The public defender assigned to Amara's case looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Timothy Walsh. Fresh out of law school. Overwhelmed caseload. Zero interest in fighting a system that paid his salary. "Look, Amara, the evidence is pretty damning. Drug possession, resisting arrest. My advice? Take the plea deal. Community service, probation. You'll be out by Christmas." Amara stared at him across the scratched metal table in the courthouse basement. 3 weeks since her arrest. 3 weeks of research that had turned her into something Walsh wasn't prepared for. What evidence? Walsh shuffled through papers like they were on fire. The drugs found in your vehicle. The officer's testimony that you resisted. Show me the chain of custody. Walsh blinked. The what? Chain of custody documentation. Every hand those drugs passed through from my car to the evidence locker. Every signature. Every timestamp. I don't think that's necessary. It's not just necessary. It's mandatory. Amara leaned forward, her voice sharp as broken glass. Fourth Amendment jurisprudence requires proper chain of custody to establish authenticity. Without it, the evidence is inadmissible. Walsh's mouth fell open. How do you know? I know because while you've been planning my surrender, I've been planning their destruction. She slid a manila folder across the table. 40 pages of research. Case law. Precedents. Constitutional violations lined up like dominoes waiting to fall. The stop was pretextual. No reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. The search exceeded Fourth Amendment bounds. And the arrest? Unlawful detention without probable cause. Walsh flipped through pages, his face growing paler with each revelation. This is graduate-level legal analysis. This is survival. 3 days later, Amara walked into that courtroom wearing her mother's best dress and carrying a briefcase full of ammunition. Prosecutor Jennifer Hayes was notorious for her conviction rate. 93%. She chewed up public defenders and spat out guilty verdicts like a machine built for destruction. But she'd never faced anything like what was about to hit her. Your Honor, the state's case is straightforward. Defendant was found with illegal substances, resisted arrest, and... Objection. Every head in the courtroom turned. Walsh looked confused. He hadn't objected to anything. Amara stood slowly, her voice carrying across the room like thunder. Your Honor, I request to represent myself in this matter. Judge Harrison frowned. Ms. Johnson, you're not an attorney. I strongly advise. Sixth Amendment guarantees my right to self-representation. Faretta v. California, 1975. The Supreme Court held that a defendant has the constitutional right to waive counsel and represent themselves, provided the waiver is knowing and intelligent. The prosecutor's smirk faltered. This wasn't supposed to happen. Furthermore, Amara continued, I move to suppress all evidence obtained during the unlawful search of my vehicle under the exclusionary rule established in Mapp v. Ohio. Silence. Then whispers rippled through the gallery like wildfire. Judge Harrison leaned forward. On what grounds? The initial stop lacked reasonable suspicion required under Terry v. Ohio. Officers testified my taillight was broken, but Defense Exhibit A shows a mechanics inspection conducted the morning of the arrest confirming all lights were functional. She produced the receipt like a weapon. The search exceeded the scope permitted under automobile exception doctrine from Carroll v. United States. No exigent circumstances justified the extensive search conducted. Prosecutor Hayes scrambled through her notes, sweat beading on her forehead. And most damaging to the state's case, Amara's voice rose like a crescendo, the chain of custody documentation is incomplete. The alleged narcotics cannot be authenticated under Federal Rules of Evidence 901. She turned to face Officer Daniels in the witness box. His arrogant smirk had vanished. Officer Daniels, you testified that you found drugs in my vehicle at approximately 10:30 p.m., correct? That's right. And you logged them into evidence when? Daniels glanced at his notes. 11:15 p.m. 45 minutes. What happened to the evidence during those 45 minutes? It was in my possession. Where in your possession? Your pocket. Your patrol car. A evidence bag. Silence. Officer Daniels, without proper chain of custody, how can this court be certain the substances you logged aren't the same substances allegedly found in my vehicle? The prosecutor shot to her feet. Objection. Counsel is implying I'm not implying anything. I'm stating that the evidence is tainted, inadmissible, and this case should be dismissed immediately. Judge Harrison studied the papers before him. The law was clear. The precedent was ironclad. The prosecution's case was crumbling like a house built on sand. Motion granted. All evidence suppressed. Case dismissed. The gavel struck like lightning. Amara Johnson had just dismantled the system that tried to destroy her. And she was only getting started. Victory tasted like ashes in her mouth. Walking down those courthouse steps, Amara should have felt triumphant. She'd beaten them. Exposed their lies. Walked away free while they scrambled to explain how a 19-year-old girl had made their case disappear. But freedom wasn't enough anymore. Because 20 minutes after her case was dismissed, she watched 3 other young black men plead guilty to charges that looked suspiciously familiar. Same playbook. Same planted evidence. Same system devouring souls who didn't know how to fight back. They didn't have Harvard law books in their passenger seats. They didn't have mothers who taught them constitutional law by lamplight. They didn't have the weapons she'd been forced to forge. So they took plea deals. Accepted guilt for crimes they didn't commit. Fed themselves to a machine that grew stronger with every surrender. Amara sat in her car in the courthouse parking lot, watching justice die in real time. This isn't victory, she realized. This is triage. She'd saved herself. But the system? The system was still feasting. Her phone buzzed. A text from her Harvard admissions counselor asking about her enrollment status. Full scholarship waiting. Prestige calling. A golden ticket out of this nightmare. She could leave. Disappear into corporate law. Make money. Stay safe. Let someone else fight the war. But then she saw him. Ezra Martinez. 16 years old. Shackled hands and feet, being led past her car in an orange jumpsuit that swallowed his thin frame. His mother walking behind him, sobbing into her hands. Same story. Traffic stop. Planted drugs. Public defender who didn't care. System that assumed guilt. But no legal ammunition to fight back. Amara watched Ezra's mother collapse onto a bench outside the courthouse, her world crumbling while officers laughed about their latest catch. That's when something inside Amara crystallized. Hardened. Transformed from anger into purpose. She wasn't just going to Harvard to become a lawyer. She was going to war. Not the kind of war fought with guns or riots. The kind fought with gavels and legal briefs and the system's own rules turned against itself. She pulled out her phone and dialed Harvard. This is Amara Johnson. I'm confirming my enrollment, but I need to modify my course selection. Of course, Ms. Johnson. What changes would you like to make? Add constitutional law. Criminal procedure. Federal litigation. Judicial ethics. Civil rights advocacy. That's quite an aggressive course load for first year. And I want to clerk for a federal judge. Preferably one with criminal jurisdiction. Silence on the other end. Ms. Johnson, most students wait until second year to seek clerkships. I'm not most students. She hung up and stared at the courthouse that had tried to devour her dreams. The same building where corrupt officers lied under oath. Where prosecutors cared more about conviction rates than justice. Where judges rubber-stamped systematic oppression. If the law is a weapon, I'll learn to wield it better than anyone, she whispered to herself, making a promise that would reshape everything. But mastery wasn't enough. She needed more than knowledge. She needed power. Real power. The kind that came with black robes and wooden gavels and the authority to make corrupt officers tremble. Amara Johnson was going to become a judge. Not just any judge. The kind of judge who remembered what it felt like to have evidence planted in her car. Who knew the weight of handcuffs cutting into innocent wrists. Who understood that justice delayed was justice denied. The kind of judge who would make Officer Daniels pay for every lie, every planted drug, every life he destroyed. She started her car and drove toward Harvard, leaving behind the girl who'd been content to save herself. In her place sat something far more dangerous, a woman with a plan to infiltrate the system from within. To climb its ranks. Learn its secrets. Master its weapons. And then burn it down from the inside. The war had begun. 3 a.m. at Massachusetts General Hospital. Amara's hands were raw from bleach, her back screaming from hours bent over toilets and blood-stained floors. Around her, the night shift moved like ghosts through sterile corridors while she scrubbed away the evidence of human suffering. This was her Harvard education. Not just the classrooms where future senators and Supreme Court justices debated constitutional theory. But the basement where she cleaned up after them for minimum wage, studying case law between vomit and gore. Her constitutional law textbook lay open on a metal cart, pages marked with drops of disinfectant. She had 47 minutes until her next class. Enough time to master 2 more civil rights precedents while mopping blood from an operating room floor. Johnson, you missed a spot. Supervisor Martinez pointed to a dark stain near the surgical table. Fresh blood. Still warm. Someone's life had hung in the balance here an hour ago. Amara dropped to her knees and scrubbed until her knuckles cracked open. Her blood joining the strangers on tile that had seen more trauma than most war zones. This was her reality. Days in lecture halls with trust fund kids who'd never worked a day in their lives. Nights cleaning up after medical procedures that cost more than her mother made in a year. But every drop of bleach. Every aching muscle. Every humiliating comment from supervisors who saw her as just another poor black girl. It all fed the fire. You think this breaks me? She thought, scrubbing harder. This is what makes me dangerous. Because while her classmates studied in climate-controlled libraries, she memorized precedents in hospital basements. While they networked at wine tastings, she built calluses that would never forget the price of justice. Her evidence professor once said, the law is an elite profession. It requires certain refinements. Amara looked down at her bleach-burned hands and smiled. Let him keep his refinements. She was building something more valuable. Weapons. 5 a.m. Shower in the hospital staff bathroom. Change from scrubs into the one professional outfit she owned. Run across campus to her criminal procedure class, still smelling faintly of disinfectant. Professor Carlisle was explaining the exclusionary rule when Amara's hand shot up. Professor, what about cases where chain of custody is deliberately broken to frame defendants? The room went quiet. These weren't abstract legal theories to her. They were memories burned into her retinas. Well, that would be theoretical prosecutorial misconduct. No. It's systematic. I can cite 17 cases from Suffolk County alone where evidence chain breaks coincide with. Ms. Johnson, perhaps we should stick to established case law rather than speculation. Speculation. Like she hadn't lived through it. Like her research wasn't backed by courthouse records and police reports most of these privileged kids would never see. But she swallowed the rage. Smiled. Played the game. Of course, Professor. My apologies. Because she was learning something more valuable than constitutional law. She was learning their language. Their customs. Their weaknesses. How to sound like them. Think like them. Predict their moves 3 steps ahead. 7 p.m. Back to the hospital. More blood. More bleach. More studying under fluorescent lights that hummed like angry insects. Her textbooks were falling apart from exposure to hospital chemicals. Pages yellow and warped, but every word memorized. Every precedent weaponized. Other students complained about the workload. About professors being too demanding. About not having enough time for social lives. Amara wanted to laugh. They had no idea what demanding looked like. Try memorizing Miranda rights while your hands bleed from industrial cleaners. Try analyzing Supreme Court decisions while scrubbing brain matter from surgical instruments. Try building a revolution on 3 hours of sleep and pure concentrated hatred for a system that thinks it can break you. Her mother called during break, voice tired from her own double shift. Baby, you don't have to do this. There are loans, other ways. No. Amara's voice was steel-wrapped in exhaustion. I won't owe them anything. When I sit behind that bench, when I hold that gavel, I want them to know I earned every inch of it. When you sit behind that bench? Not if, Mom. When? Because every night in that basement, every insult from supervisors, every condescending comment from professors was just fuel for the fire she was building. They thought poverty would break her spirit. Instead, it was forging her into something they'd never seen coming. Something that would make Officer Daniels wish he'd never learned her name. 7 years later, Amara Johnson walked back through the doors of Suffolk County Courthouse. Same marble floors. Same echo of footsteps. Same smell of old wood and older corruption. But everything else had changed. The girl who'd been dragged out in handcuffs was gone. In her place stood something the system had never anticipated, a Harvard-educated defense attorney with scars for armor and law books for weapons. Her heels clicked against marble like a countdown. Each step measured. Deliberate. The sound of inevitability approaching. Court employees glanced up from their desks, doing double takes at the confident black woman in the $1,000 suit. She didn't belong in their mental filing system. Too polished to be a defendant. Too dangerous to be ignored. Amara savored their confusion. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. Let them try to figure out where they'd seen her before. They would remember soon enough. She was checking in at the clerk's office when she heard it. That laugh. Harsh and familiar, like nails on a chalkboard dipped in acid. Officer Daniels stood near the security checkpoint, regaling 2 rookie cops with war stories. Older now. Grayer. But the same predatory smirk that had haunted her nightmares for 7 years. So there she was, this uppity college girl, thinking her fancy acceptance letter would save her. Had to teach her some respect. The rookies laughed dutifully. They always did. That's how the system perpetuated itself. New blood learning from old poison. What happened to her, one asked. Probably dropped out, ended up where she belonged. They always do. These people think they can rise above their station, but reality has a way of. Excuse me. Daniels turned, irritation flashing across his face at being interrupted. But when he saw her, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition trying to surface through years of casual cruelty. I'm Attorney Johnson. I believe we've met before. She extended her hand like a challenge. Her grip firm. Her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Daniels stared at her face, pieces clicking into place. The girl from the traffic stop. The one who'd fought back. The one who'd won. But that was impossible. She was supposed to be broken. Destroyed. Lost in the system like all the others. Not standing here in designer clothes with law degrees and the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned to play their game better than they did. You look familiar, he said slowly, his voice uncertain for the first time in years. I'm sure I do. 7 years ago, you arrested me for drug possession. Planted evidence in my car. Destroyed my Harvard acceptance letter while laughing about affirmative action. The color drained from his face. Around them, conversations died. Even the rookies stopped laughing. I don't recall. Oh, but I do. Every detail. Every lie you told under oath. Every constitutional right you violated. It's all burned into my memory like a brand. She stepped closer. Close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume. Close enough to see the fear creeping into his eyes. But here's what's really interesting, Officer Daniels. I didn't just survive what you did to me. I weaponized it. She gestured to her briefcase. To her suit. To the law degree hanging in her office across town. Every night I spent scrubbing hospital floors to pay for law school, I thought about you. Every case precedent I memorized, every constitutional amendment I mastered, every legal strategy one developed, it was all preparation for this moment. Daniels tried to step back but bumped into the security desk. Trapped. Cornered. The hunter becoming the hunted. What do you want? Amara's smile widened. Not cruel. Not vindictive. Just the quiet satisfaction of a chess player who'd been planning this move for 7 years. Justice, Officer Daniels. Pure, beautiful, constitutional justice. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, an officer. You might want to review your arrest procedures. I'll be representing a lot of your victims from now on. And unlike that scared 19-year-old girl you brutalized, I now know exactly how to dismantle every lie you've ever told. Her heels clicked away across the marble, leaving Daniels frozen in place like a statue of a man who just realized his past had come to collect its due. The rookies stared at him, questions forming in their eyes. If this was how he treated innocent people, what else had he done? What other lies had he told? What other lives had he destroyed? But Amara was already gone, disappearing into the courthouse like a beautiful nightmare he couldn't wake up from. The war had begun. 3 weeks later, Daniels cornered her in the courthouse parking garage. Shadows stretched between concrete pillars like fingers reaching for secrets. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in sickly yellow. Perfect hunting ground for a predator who thought he still held power. Amara was loading case files into her car when she heard the footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. The confident stride of a man who'd never learned to fear consequences. Well. The little lawyer girl. She didn't turn around. Didn't flinch. Just continued organizing her briefcase like he was nothing more than background noise. Officer Daniels. Working late? Funny thing about your little performance in there. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to the threatening whisper that had terrified countless victims. Got people asking questions. Making my life complicated. Good. The simple word hung in the air like a challenge. Amara finally turned to face him, her back straight, eyes steady. No trace of the 19-year-old girl he'd brutalized. You think you're untouchable now? Think that fancy degree makes you special? His hand rested on his weapon. A subtle threat. The same intimidation tactic that had worked for 20 years of terrorizing the powerless. But Amara just smiled. I think you're scared. Scared? Of you? His laugh was harsh, desperate. You're still the same ghetto rat I arrested 7 years ago. Suit don't change what you are. You're right. I am the same person. She stepped closer, invading his space like he'd once invaded hers. I'm still the girl whose father you people destroyed. Still the woman whose dreams you tried to shred. Still the victim of your planted evidence and perjured testimony. Another step. Now they were close enough that she could see the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool garage air. But here's what's different, Officer Daniels. That girl had no power. No weapons. No way to fight back. She gestured to her briefcase. To her law degree. To the constitutional knowledge that had transformed her from victim to threat. This woman knows exactly how to destroy you. Daniels' hand tightened on his weapon. You threatening a police officer? I'm promising a corrupt cop that his day of reckoning is coming. The words hit like bullets. Daniels stepped forward, using his size to intimidate. The same tactic that had worked on teenage girls and frightened mothers for decades. Listen here, you little. What? What am I, Officer Daniels? Say it. Use the word that's been burning in your throat since the moment you saw me succeed. His face twisted with rage and something uglier. The mask slipping. The casual racism that had always lived just beneath his badge finally showing itself. You people need to know your place. Lawyer or not, you're still nothing but. Still recording everything on my phone. Amara held up her device, red light blinking. Please, continue. I'm sure Internal Affairs would love to hear how one of their officers threatens defense attorneys in parking garages. Daniels lunged forward, grabbing for the phone. But Amara was ready. 7 years of preparation had taught her to anticipate his moves. She stepped aside, letting his momentum carry him past her. Off balance. Desperate. Exactly where she wanted him. Assault on an attorney? That's a felony, Officer Daniels. Add it to the growing list. He spun around, face red with fury and humiliation. This isn't over. You're absolutely right. Amara got into her car, started the engine. It's just beginning. She rolled down her window as she prepared to leave. Oh, an officer. You might want to review your personnel file. I've been doing some research into your arrest patterns. Funny how they correlate with racial demographics. Very statistical. Very damning. Very actionable. She drove away, leaving him standing alone under flickering lights, finally understanding what she'd become. Not just a lawyer. Not just a threat. A hunter who'd been tracking him for 7 years and was finally ready to strike. In her rearview mirror, she watched him shrink into the shadows, a predator who'd just realized he was now the prey. The game had changed. And she was winning. The courtroom was packed. Standing room only. Word had spread through the legal community like wildfire. The young defense attorney who'd been systematically dismantling corrupt arrests was about to take on Officer Daniels. And everyone wanted to watch. Amara entered through the back doors, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown timer. Every eye in the gallery followed her movement to the defense table where her client sat, Marcus Williams, 17 years old, charged with assault he didn't commit. The same Marcus whose only crime was existing while black in Officer Daniels' territory. Daniels lounged in the witness section, badge gleaming under fluorescent lights. He'd testified in this courthouse hundreds of times. Sent dozens of innocent people to prison with his lies. Today would be no different. Except today, Amara Johnson was hunting him. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Morrison presiding. The old judge shuffled to his bench, already looking bored. Another day of rubber-stamping convictions. Another performance in the theater of broken justice. People versus Williams. Counselors ready. The prosecutor, a nervous young man who'd never questioned a police report in his life, stood first. Ready, Your Honor. Then Amara rose. Slowly. Deliberately. Her voice cut through the courtroom like steel. Ready to expose the truth, Your Honor. Something in her tone made Daniels sit up straighter. Made the gallery lean forward. Made the air itself feel electric with possibility. The prosecution's case was textbook corruption. Witness testimony that changed 3 times. Evidence that appeared and disappeared. And the star witness, Officer Daniels, ready to lie under oath one more time. When they called his name, Daniels swaggered to the witness stand like he owned it. Officer Daniels, did you witness the defendant assault the victim? Absolutely. Unprovoked attack. Kid came out of nowhere, started throwing punches like a wild animal. Wild animal. The phrase hung in the air like poison gas. These people don't know how to control themselves, he continued, playing to the gallery. Violence is all they understand. Amara's pen snapped in half. The sound was as sharp as a gunshot in the quiet courtroom. When cross-examination began, she stood like an avenging angel. "Officer Daniels, you testified the assault was unprovoked." "That's right. No prior interaction between defendant and victim?" "None." "Then explain this." She held up a photograph. Security camera footage showing the victim, a grown man, shoving 17-year-old Marcus first. The image is unclear." "Explain this." Another photo. The victim's hand on Marcus's throat. "And this." A third image. The victim swinging first while Marcus raised his hands defensively. "So either you didn't witness what you claim to have witnessed, or you're committing perjury. Which is it?" Daniel's face turned red. 23 years of unchallenged authority crumbling in real time. "Listen here, you little." "Little what, Officer Daniels?" "Say it. Say what you're really thinking." The courtroom held its breath. This wasn't cross-examination anymore. This was war. You think because you got some fancy law degree, you can disrespect. I think a corrupt cop is about to show his true colors. Daniels shot to his feet, pointing at her with a shaking finger. "You people need to learn your place. Suit doesn't change what you are." The gallery gasped. Even Judge Morrison looked shocked at the naked racism. But Amara just smiled. Cold. Calculating. Deadly. "What am I, Officer Daniels? You're a troublemaker who doesn't belong in this courtroom. And you're a racist who plants evidence and lies under oath." That's when he snapped. Daniels leaped from the witness stand, crossing the courtroom in 3 strides. His face twisted with 23 years of hatred finally unleashed. "How dare you!" His open hand caught her across the face with a sound like thunder. Crack. Papers exploded from her hands. Her head snapped sideways. The force sent her stumbling backward into the defense table. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Screams. Shouts. Chairs scraping against marble as people jumped to their feet. But Amara didn't fall. Didn't cry. Didn't even touch her burning cheek. Instead, she straightened. Lifted her chin. And spoke 6 words that changed everything. "You just struck an officer of the court." Daniels laughed through his rage. "You? An officer of the court? You're nothing but bailiffs, stand down." Judge Morrison's voice boomed through the chaos, silencing every sound except the hammering of hearts. "Today is Judge Amara Johnson's first day on the bench." Silence. Absolute. Deafening. "Your Honor, please take your seat." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Today is Judge Amara Johnson's first day on the bench." Daniels staggered backward as if he'd been shot. His face drained of all color, leaving him looking like a ghost of his former arrogance. That's impossible." But Judge Morrison continued, his weathered voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Ms. Johnson was confirmed by the Senate 3 weeks ago. Sworn in this morning. This courtroom now falls under her jurisdiction." The gallery erupted. Whispers became shouts. Phones appeared like magic, recording every second of what would become the most viral courtroom moment in history. "She's a judge. He just slapped a judge. In open court. This is insane." Daniel spun around, searching for escape, for explanation, for any reality where this wasn't happening. But everywhere he looked, he saw the truth reflected in shocked faces and recording devices. The defense attorney he'd been terrorizing. The girl he'd arrested 7 years ago. The woman he'd threatened in parking garages. She was a federal judge. And he had just committed assault against her in front of 50 witnesses and a dozen cameras. Amara remained perfectly composed, one hand still pressed to her reddening cheek. She could have been discussing the weather for all the emotion she showed. "Officer Daniels," her voice cut through the chaos like a blade, "you seem surprised. You can't be a judge." "Why not?" "Because I'm black. Because I grew up poor. Because you once planted drugs in my car." Each question hit him like a physical blow. Around the courtroom, people leaned forward, hungry for every word of this impossible confrontation. "7 years ago, you thought you destroyed my life. Shattered my dreams. Put me in my place." She took a step toward him. Then another. Moving like a predator who'd been patient far too long. "But here's what you never understood about people like me, Officer Daniels. We don't break. We don't surrender. We don't forget. We evolve." Daniels looked around desperately, seeking support from his fellow officers. But they had melted away like smoke, leaving him isolated in the center of his crumbling world. "This is entrapment," he shouted suddenly. "You set me up." Amara's laugh was soft, musical, utterly without mercy. "I set you up." "How?" "By becoming qualified for the bench. By earning my law degree summa cum laude. By serving as a federal prosecutor for 3 years before my judicial appointment." She spread her hands wide, encompassing the courtroom, the chaos, the complete reversal of power. "I didn't set you up, Officer Daniels. I simply became everything you said I could never be." The truth of it hit him like a sledgehammer. This wasn't some elaborate scheme. This was justice. Pure, inevitable, beautiful justice. "The girl you brutalized. She studied constitutional law while scrubbing hospital floors. The woman you threatened. She built a career dismantling corrupt cops like you. The judge you just assaulted." Her smile was razor-sharp and absolutely terrifying. "She's been waiting 7 years for this exact moment." Judge Morrison cleared his throat, breaking the spell that held the courtroom transfixed. "Judge Johnson, would you like to assume the bench?" Amara straightened her jacket. Smoothed down papers that had scattered when Daniel struck her. Picked up her briefcase with hands that didn't shake despite everything. "Thank you, Judge Morrison. I believe I will." She began walking toward the bench. Each step echoed through the silent courtroom like a countdown to reckoning. Daniels watched her approach the seat of power with growing horror. The same courtroom where he'd testified in hundreds of cases. Where he'd sent innocent people to prison with his lies. Where he'd been king for over 2 decades. It would now be ruled by the woman he tried to destroy. "This isn't over," he whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. Only the desperate denial of a man watching his world collapse. Amara paused at the steps leading up to the bench. Turned back to face him one final time as a fellow occupant of the courtroom floor. "You're absolutely right, Officer Daniels. This isn't over." Her eyes glittered with something that made his blood run cold. "It's just beginning." Then she climbed the steps to the bench, each one carrying her higher above him, further from his reach, closer to the power she'd earned through blood and brilliance. The same bench where she would decide his fate. The same gavel she would use to deliver his judgment. The same black robes that would shield her as she dismantled everything he'd built on lies and corruption. Officer Daniels had spent 23 years believing he was untouchable. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. The silence stretched like a held breath across the packed courtroom. Amara stood at the base of the judicial bench, looking up at the leather chair that represented everything she'd fought for. Every sleepless night scrubbing hospital floors. Every racist comment from professors. Every moment Daniels had made her feel powerless. All leading to this. She placed her hand on the polished wood railing and began to climb. Each step echoed through the courtroom like a heartbeat. Like destiny finding its rhythm. Step 1, the girl who watched her father dragged away in handcuffs. Step 2, the teenager accused of academic dishonesty for being too brilliant. Step 3, the young woman brutalized and framed by corrupt cops. Step 4, the law student who bled over textbooks while cleaning up after surgeries. Step 5, the attorney who turned the system's weapons against itself. Step 6, the judge who would rewrite the rules of justice. When she reached the top, Amara turned to face the courtroom. The same space that had witnessed her humiliation now awaited her command. The same people who had watched her get slapped now stared up at her in awe. She sat down slowly, savoring the weight of authority settling around her like armor. The leather was warm. The view was intoxicating. The power was absolute. For a moment, she just breathed. Let the reality sink in. Let Daniels see exactly how far she'd climbed while he'd remained in the gutter. Then she reached for the gavel. The wooden hammer felt perfect in her hand. Balanced. Purposeful. An instrument of justice that had been waiting for her to wield it. She raised it high, letting everyone see the symbol of her authority. And brought it down with a thunderous crack that shook the walls. Order in MY Court. Her voice boomed through the chamber with the force of 7 years of suppressed rage finally unleashed. Every conversation died. Every whisper ceased. Every phone stopped recording. The courtroom belonged to her now. Be seated. All of you. The gallery dropped like they'd been shot. Lawyers, reporters, spectators, everyone scrambling to obey the commanding presence that had materialized on the bench. Everyone except Daniels. He stood frozen in the center of the courtroom, staring up at her like a man watching his own execution. Officer Daniels. Her voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. Precise. Surgical. Deadly. You're still standing. I don't understand what's happening. What's happening, Amara leaned forward, her eyes locked on his, is that you just committed felony assault against a federal judge in open court. The words hit him like physical blows. Around the courtroom, people shifted in their seats, recognizing they were witnessing something historic. What's happening is that your 23-year career of planting evidence, committing perjury, and brutalizing innocent people has finally caught up with you. She gestured to the gallery, where dozens of phones continued recording every word. What's happening is that your assault on me, a sitting federal judge, is being broadcast live to the internet, where it will be viewed millions of times by people who've been waiting their entire lives to see a corrupt cop face consequences. Daniels tried to speak, but no words came. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. But most importantly, Officer Daniels, what's happening is justice. She stood, her black robes flowing around her like wings of vengeance. The same justice you denied my father when you people destroyed him. The same justice you denied me when you planted drugs in my car. The same justice you've denied hundreds of innocent people whose only crime was existing while black in your territory. Her voice rose with each word, filling the courtroom with righteous fury. That justice has been patient. It has been studying. It has been preparing. She pointed the gavel at him like a weapon. And now it's sitting on this bench, wearing these robes, holding this gavel. And it's coming for you. The courtroom erupted. Applause thundered from the gallery. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed like lightning. But Amara only had eyes for Daniels, who stood broken in the center of the chaos he'd created. The hunter had become the hunted. The victim had become the judge. The powerless had become unstoppable. And the reckoning was just beginning. She brought the gavel down again, the sound cutting through the celebration like a final judgment. Court is now in session. And Officer Daniels? She smiled with the cold satisfaction of a predator who'd waited 7 years to spring her trap. You're about to learn what justice really looks like. The courtroom had become a living, breathing organism of pure emotion. In the gallery, tears streamed down faces. Not sad tears, tears of vindication. Of hope. Of witnessing something impossible become inevitable. An elderly black woman in the third row clutched her chest, sobbing openly. Her grandson had been one of Daniel's victims 3 years ago. Planted drugs. False testimony. 5 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. She'd watched that same officer swagger through this same courtroom, lying under oath while her boy's future crumbled. Now she watched him standing powerless before a judge who looked like her. Who understood her pain. Who would finally make things right. Sweet Jesus, she whispered through her tears. Sweet Jesus, finally. Behind her, a young father held his phone with shaking hands, live streaming to his wife at home. Baby, you need to see this. That cop who arrested Malik. The one who planted the gun. He just slapped a federal judge. A black woman federal judge. And she's about to destroy him. His voice cracked with emotion he couldn't contain. Years of helpless rage finally finding release. Across the aisle, court reporters frantically typed, trying to capture every word of this historic moment. Their professional composure shattered by the raw power of justice finally arriving. But nowhere was the emotional tsunami more powerful than at the defense table. Marcus Williams, the 17-year-old client Amara had been defending, stared up at the bench in complete shock. Ms. Johnson. His voice was barely a whisper. You're really a judge. She looked down at him, this young man who reminded her so much of herself at that age. Scared. Trapped. Facing a system designed to devour him. I am, Marcus. And you're going home today. The words hit him like lightning. Home. Not prison. Not juvenile detention. Not another statistic in Daniel's collection of destroyed lives. Home. He buried his face in his hands and wept. The emotional contagion spread through the courtroom like wildfire. Lawyers who'd watched Daniels railroad their clients for years felt vindication burning in their chests. Families who'd seen their children disappear into the system felt hope rekindling in their hearts. Even the court stenographer was crying, her fingers trembling over the keys as she recorded history being made. But the most powerful emotion belonged to the man standing alone in the center of it all. Fear. Pure, undiluted, existential terror. Daniels finally understood what his victims had felt. The helplessness. The desperation. The crushing weight of a system designed to destroy you. He looked around the courtroom, searching for allies, for escape, for any reality where this wasn't happening. But everywhere he turned, he saw the faces of people he'd wronged. Families he'd destroyed. Lives he'd shattered for sport. And they were all smiling. Not cruel smiles. Not vindictive grins. The quiet, satisfied smiles of people watching justice finally arrive. Your Honor, a voice called from the gallery. An older black man stood up, his hands shaking with emotion. My name is Jerome Washington. That officer, he arrested my son in 2018. Planted cocaine in his backpack. My boy was 14 years old. His voice broke. 14. And this man destroyed his life because he could. Another voice joined him. Patricia Collins. My daughter was 16 when he framed her. Marcus Thompson. My nephew. Diana Ross, not the singer, a woman said with a tearful laugh. My grandson. One by one, they stood. A chorus of victims. A symphony of pain finally finding its voice. Each name was a wound Daniels had inflicted. Each story was a life he destroyed. Each voice was an accusation he couldn't deny. The weight of his crimes pressed down on him like a physical force. 23 years of casual cruelty. Hundreds of lives shattered. Thousands of family members scarred. All of it crashing down at once. He staggered under the emotional assault, finally understanding the true scope of his destruction. But Amara wasn't finished. She raised her hand, and the courtroom fell silent. Every eye turned to her. Every breath held. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every victim who'd never gotten justice. Every family who'd never seen their tormentor face consequences. Every dreamer who'd been told they weren't good enough. For 23 years, this courtroom has been a place of injustice. A theater where lies were performed and innocent people were condemned. Her voice rose, filling every corner of the chamber. Today, that ends. Today, justice returns to these halls. The applause was deafening. Thunderous. The sound of hope being reborn. And in the center of it all, Officer Daniels finally understood what it felt like to be powerless. The reckoning had begun. The applause faded, leaving only the sound of Amara's gavel cutting through the air like a blade. Order. We have business to conclude. Her voice was different now. Not the passionate advocate who'd been defending Marcus Williams. Not the victim who'd been struck by Daniels. This was Judge Amara Johnson, cold, precise, and absolutely lethal. She turned her attention to the prosecutor, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Mr. Rodriguez, regarding the case against Marcus Williams. Your Honor. The testimony we just witnessed from Officer Daniels. Under oath. In my courtroom. Her eyes were laser-focused. Would you characterize it as truthful? Rodriguez glanced desperately at Daniels, who stood frozen like a statue of his former arrogance. The officer testified to what he observed. The officer testified that the victim was murdered. Mr. Murphy, would you please stand? The Very Alive store owner rose from the gallery, waving awkwardly. The officer testified that the defendant was covered in blood from a fatal shooting. Yet the medical report shows minor cuts from broken glass. She held up a document like evidence in a murder trial. The officer testified that the assault was unprovoked. Yet security footage, which somehow never made it into the case file, shows the victim initiating contact. Rodriguez was sweating now. Your Honor, if there were procedural errors. Procedural errors? Amara's voice could have frozen fire. Officer Daniels just committed perjury in federal court. That's not a procedural error. That's a felony. The courtroom held its breath as she turned her full attention to Daniels. Officer Daniels, you are still under oath. Do you understand that perjury in federal court carries a penalty of up to 5 years in prison? Daniels tried to speak, but only managed to croak. I need a verbal response. Yes. Good. Now, in your testimony today, you stated that Marcus Williams murdered the store owner. Was that statement true or false? The question hung in the air like a noose. Every person in the courtroom knew the answer. Everyone except Daniels, who was trapped between admitting perjury or doubling down on an obvious lie. There was confusion in the moment. True or false, Officer Daniels? Her voice cut through his stammering like a scalpel. False, he whispered. Louder. False. So you lied under oath in federal court. It wasn't intentional. Intent is irrelevant. You swore to tell the truth. You lied. That is perjury. She made a note on her legal pad with deliberate precision. Moving on. You testified that the defendant was covered in blood from the shooting. True or false? Daniels looked around desperately, but there was nowhere to run. False. Another lie under oath. You testified that the assault was unprovoked. The security footage shows otherwise. True or false? False. 3 counts of perjury in a single testimony. Her pen scratched against paper like a death warrant being signed. But we're not finished. She opened a thick folder that appeared on her bench as if by magic. Officer Daniels, how many arrests have you made in the past 5 years? I don't know the exact number. 437. How many of those arrests involved black or Hispanic defendants? The courtroom went silent. This wasn't about Marcus Williams anymore. This was about everything. I don't keep track of race. 412. 94%. Her voice was surgical in its precision. In a district that's 62% white. The mathematics of racism laid bare for everyone to see. Of those 412 arrests of minorities, how many resulted in charges being dropped due to evidence problems? Daniels was shaking now. I don't. 63. How many involved evidence that mysteriously appeared between the arrest and booking? Your Honor, I object to this line of questioning. Rodriguez was on his feet, desperate to stop the demolition of his star witness. Overruled. This goes directly to the witness's credibility. She turned back to Daniels like a predator circling wounded prey. 37 cases, Officer Daniels. 37 times you found drugs, weapons, or contraband that wasn't there during the initial search. The courtroom was deadly silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, transfixed by the systematic destruction unfolding. Would you care to explain this statistical anomaly? Daniels opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. How do you explain 23 years of corruption in a single sentence? No explanation. Then let me offer one. Amara stood, her black robes flowing around her like the wings of justice itself. You are a corrupt police officer who has spent his career planting evidence, lying under oath, and destroying innocent lives for sport. Each word hit like a physical blow. And today, in my courtroom, that career ends. She raised her gavel high, the symbol of ultimate judicial authority. Case dismissed. All charges against Marcus Williams are dropped immediately. The gavel fell like thunder. Justice had finally arrived. The gavel's echo hadn't finished reverberating when Amara spoke again. But we're not finished here. Her words cut through the celebration like ice through fire. The gallery, which had erupted in cheers at Marcus Williams' freedom, fell silent again. Officer Daniels approached the bench. Daniels stood frozen, his face cycling through denial and terror. Around him, the courtroom held its breath. I said approach. The command carried the weight of absolute authority. Slowly, like a man walking to his execution, Daniels shuffled forward. With each step, he seemed to shrink. The swagger was gone. The arrogance had melted. The predator had become prey. When he reached the bench, Amara looked down at him from her position of power. The same height difference that had once intimidated her now worked in her favor. 23 years, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. 23 years of systematic corruption. Of lives destroyed. Of justice perverted. She opened another folder, this one thicker than the last. I've spent the last 7 years building this file. Every case you contaminated. Every life you shattered. Every family you destroyed. Daniels stared up at her, finally understanding the scope of her preparation. You thought you were untouchable. Protected by your badge. Shielded by a system that values convictions over truth. Her voice rose, filling the courtroom with righteous fury. But you made one crucial mistake, Officer Daniels. You underestimated your victims. She gestured to the gallery, where dozens of faces watched with hungry anticipation. Every person you framed. Every family you destroyed. Every dream you crushed. They all had one thing in common. Leaning forward, she fixed him with eyes that burned with 7 years of calculated revenge. They all remembered. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear heartbeats. And one of them, just one, decided to do something about it. She stood, her black robes billowing around her like the wings of an avenging angel. Officer Daniels, by the authority vested in me as a federal judge, I hereby find you in contempt of court for assault on a judicial officer. I sentence you to 6 months in federal custody. The first hammer blow. But she wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate federal investigation into your conduct over the past decade. Every arrest. Every case. Every piece of evidence you've touched. Daniels swayed on his feet like a tree in a hurricane. I am also recommending that the district attorney's office review every conviction obtained through your testimony for potential wrongful prosecution. And I am personally forwarding this case to the FBI's Civil Rights Division for potential charges under Section 1983, deprivation of rights under color of law. Each sentence was a death blow to everything he'd built. But most importantly, her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than shouting, I am ensuring that every person in this gallery, every victim of your corruption, gets their day in court. She turned to address the room. To every family whose loved one was framed by this officer. To every parent who watched their child disappear into a system rigged against them. To every person who lost faith in justice because of men like him. Her voice swelled with power and purpose. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Not anymore. Not in my court. The applause was thunderous. 23 years of suppressed rage finally finding release. But Amara raised her hand for silence. Officer Daniels, do you have anything to say before I pass final judgment? Daniels looked up at her, this woman he'd once thought he could break, now holding absolute power over his fate. I was just doing my job. The excuse hung in the air like a dying breath. Amara's laugh was soft, musical, and utterly without mercy. Your job was to serve and protect. Instead, you served yourself and protected no one. She lifted her gavel one final time. Your badge is hereby stripped. Your pension is forfeit. Your career is over. And Officer Daniels? He looked up at her with the broken expression of a man who'd finally met his match. The scared 19-year-old girl you brutalized 7 years ago. She wants you to know something. Amara's smile was beautiful and terrible. She won. The gavel fell like the final note of a symphony. Crack. Justice wasn't just served. It was delivered with interest. In the gallery, people wept openly. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally witnessing accountability. Marcus Williams was free. Daniels was finished. And the system that had protected corruption for decades had just met its reckoning. The revolution had begun. And it was wearing black robes. The gavel's final echo was still ringing when the bailiffs moved. 2 federal marshals stepped forward, their faces professionally neutral but their eyes hard with purpose. They'd heard every word of Daniel's systematic corruption. They'd watched him assault a federal judge. They knew exactly what kind of man they were arresting. Officer Daniels, the lead marshal said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, turn around and place your hands behind your back. For a moment, Daniels didn't move. Couldn't move. The reality hadn't fully penetrated his shattered psyche. Him. In handcuffs. Impossible. Sir, turn around. The second command carried more weight. More threat. The marshals weren't asking anymore. Slowly, like a man in a nightmare, Daniels turned his back to the courtroom. To the gallery full of his victims. To the judge who had just destroyed his life. The click of handcuffs echoed through the chamber like gunshots. The same sound he'd inflicted on hundreds of innocent people was now marking his own downfall. You have the right to remain silent. The Miranda rights he'd recited thousands of times, often while planting evidence, were now being read to him. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted by the universe itself. In the gallery, people began to stand. Not in respect, but in celebration. The elderly woman whose grandson had been framed clapped her hands together, tears streaming down her weathered face. Finally, she whispered. Lord Jesus, finally. A young father lifted his phone higher, making sure the world could see this moment. Y'all seeing this? The cop who destroyed my family just got arrested by his own people. Marcus Williams watched from the defense table, his 17-year-old mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. The officer who'd been about to send him to prison was now the one in chains. "Ms. Johnson, Your Honor," he whispered, "is this really happening?" Amara looked down at him, her expression softening for the first time since taking the bench. "It's happening, Marcus. And it's just the beginning." As the marshals prepared to lead Daniels away, he turned back toward the bench. His face was pale, his eyes wild with desperation. "This isn't justice," he shouted, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "This is revenge." The courtroom fell silent, waiting to see how Judge Johnson would respond to this final outburst. Amara stood slowly, her black robes making her appear larger than life. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every victim who'd never gotten their day in court. "Officer Daniels, you're confusing justice with consequences. For 23 years, you escaped both. Today, they found you." She gestured to the gallery, where dozens of faces watched his downfall with satisfaction. Every person in this room knows the difference between justice and revenge. Justice is what happens in courtrooms, under oath, with evidence and due process. Her voice hardened to steel. Revenge is what you did to innocent people in dark alleys and empty parking lots. The marshals began moving toward the exit, half dragging Daniels, who seemed to have forgotten how to walk. But Amara wasn't finished. "Officer Daniels." He stopped, turned back one final time. "The scared girl you arrested 7 years ago. She studied constitutional law every night for 7 years. She memorized every precedent, every statute, every protection you violated. Her smile was radiant and terrible. She became everything you said she couldn't be. And she did it legally, ethically, and constitutionally. That's not revenge. That's evolution." The marshals resumed their escort, but this time Daniels didn't resist. He walked like a broken man through the courtroom that had witnessed his reign of terror. Past the gallery where his victims watched in satisfaction. Past the lawyers who'd seen him lie under oath for decades. Past the reporters whose cameras captured every step of his downfall. As they reached the courtroom doors, someone in the gallery began to clap. Slowly at first, then building as others joined in. The applause followed Daniels out of the courtroom like a funeral march played in reverse. Not mourning his departure, but celebrating his downfall. The doors closed behind him with a final, definitive click. 23 years of corruption had just walked out of that courtroom in handcuffs. But in the judge's chair sat something more powerful than any corrupt cop had ever been. Justice itself. Wearing black robes and carrying a Harvard Law degree earned through blood, sweat, and 7 years of perfect revenge. Amara Johnson looked out over her courtroom, her kingdom, and smiled. The girl who'd been powerless was now the most powerful person in the building. The student had become the teacher. The victim had become the victor. And the hunter had finally claimed her prey. Court is adjourned. One final crack of the gavel. Justice was served. Within 3 minutes of Daniels being led away in handcuffs, the first video hit social media. Corrupt cop slaps black judge, instantly regrets it. The footage was crystal clear. Shot from multiple angles by dozens of phones. No way to spin it. No way to deny it. No way to bury it. The slap. The silence. The revelation. The arrest. All of it captured in high definition and spreading across the internet like wildfire. By the time Amara left the courthouse, the video had been shared 50,000 times. By evening, it was trending worldwide. Hashtag Justice for Judge Johnson. Hashtag Daniels downfall. Hashtag From Victim to Victor. Hashtag Systemic Change. The comments poured in like a digital avalanche. Finally. Been waiting my whole life to see a corrupt cop face consequences. This woman is everything. Studied her way from victim to judge just to destroy the man who tried to break her. The look on his face when he realized who she was. Priceless. She didn't just win. She evolved. Then she obliterated him with his own system. But it wasn't just celebration. The story tapped into something deeper. Something raw. My brother was killed by cops like this. Planted drugs. No justice. Seeing this gives me hope. I was arrested at 16. Same playbook. This judge just did what the system never would, hold them accountable. Every black parent who's watched their child disappear into corrupt courts needs to see this. The video crossed racial lines, economic boundaries, political divides. Because corruption wasn't a black issue or a white issue. It was a human issue. And everyone could see themselves in either Amara's triumph or Daniel's downfall. Cable news picked it up within hours. In Chicago, a single mother named Kenya paused her third job, cleaning offices at 2 a.m., to watch the footage on her cracked phone screen. Her 15-year-old son had been arrested last year. Same story. Same planted drugs. Same destroyed future. As she watched Daniels get handcuffed, Kenya broke down sobbing in an empty corporate hallway. "That's what it looks like," she whispered to her phone. "That's what justice looks like." In Detroit, 68-year-old Robert sat in his wheelchair, watching the video for the 7th time. His grandson had been shot by police in 2019. No charges. No accountability. No justice. When Amara said, "She won," Robert raised his fist in the air. Yes, he shouted to his empty apartment. Yes, she did. For the first time in 4 years, he felt hope. In Los Angeles, Maria gathered her 3 children around their tablet. Her husband had been deported after a traffic stop that started with broken taillights and ended with discovered drugs. "Mira, Ms. Niños," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Watch this woman. She shows us what's possible." Her 8-year-old daughter asked, "Mom, why are you crying?" "Because sometimes the good guys win, Mija. Sometimes they actually win." The story hit every demographic, every community that had been brutalized by corrupt authority. College campuses erupted in spontaneous celebrations. Students who'd been profiled, harassed, and arrested for existing while different finally saw someone fight back and win. At Howard University, they projected the video on the side of a building. Hundreds gathered to watch, cheering every moment. "She's one of us," someone shouted. "She made it. She beat them." The fantasy wasn't just personal, it was collective. For decades, people had dreamed of this moment. The corrupt cop getting his comeuppance. The victim rising to power. The system eating itself from the inside. Hollywood had made movies about it. Books had been written. Songs had been sung. But this was real. This was happening. This was justice served with surgical precision and legal perfection. In barbershops and beauty salons, the video played on repeat. Conversations that had been whispered for generations were now shouted with pride. "You see how she did that? She didn't just get angry. She got educated. 7 years of studying law just to destroy that one cop. That's commitment. She turned his own system against him. Used their own rules to bury him. That's genius." The fantasy fulfilled wasn't just about revenge. It was about proving that the system could work when the right person held the power. That corruption wasn't invincible. That victims weren't powerless. That intelligence and perseverance could triumph over badges and brutality. In prison visiting rooms, wives and mothers showed the video to their incarcerated sons and husbands. This is what fighting back looks like. Not violence. Not riots. Education. Inmates passed phones through cells, watching Daniels get arrested with a satisfaction that ran soul deep. "Man, I wish I could have been there when that judge laid his ass out. She did what all of us wanted to do. But she did it legally. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The video became more than entertainment. It became therapy. Generational trauma that had been passed down like family recipes finally found its release valve. Grandma, you need to see this. Dad, remember what happened to Uncle Jerome? Watch this. Kids, this is why we study. This is why education matters. Therapists reported unprecedented demand for appointments. Not for crisis intervention, but for processing hope. I never thought I'd live to see a corrupt cop actually face consequences. For 40 years, I've carried anger about what they did to my family. Watching this, I feel like I can finally breathe. My daughter asked me if bad people ever get punished. For the first time, I could say yes. The justice fantasy wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoration. Seeing that the world could be fair. That hard work could be rewarded. That victims could become victors. That the arc of the moral universe really did bend toward justice, sometimes it just needed someone brilliant enough to grab it and pull. In living rooms across the country, families gathered to watch together. This is history, fathers told their sons. Remember this moment. This is what we've been waiting for, mothers told their daughters. This is what courage looks like. In churches, pastors rewrote Sunday sermons. God works in mysterious ways, but sometimes his justice is crystal clear. The video became a modern parable. David and Goliath with law degrees and federal authority. But the most powerful response came from the children. Kids who'd grown up watching their parents flinch when police cars drove by. Who'd been taught to keep their hands visible and voices quiet. Suddenly, they saw something different. A black woman in robes of power. A corrupt system held accountable. A victory that was complete, legal, and permanent. Mommy, can I be a judge when I grow up? Daddy, if someone hurts me, can I study law and make them stop? Will the police be scared of me if I become a judge like her? For the first time in generations, children dreamed of conquering the system instead of surviving it. The justice fantasy had become reality. And reality had become hope. The footage was cinematic perfection. Hollywood couldn't have scripted it better. The tension building through cross-examination. The explosive violence of the slap. The moment of stunned silence. The earth-shattering revelation. The complete reversal of power. And all of it captured in crystal-clear 4K from multiple angles. Within 24 hours, the video had been edited into countless versions. Slow-motion replays of the slap. Freeze frames of Daniel's face when he realized who she was. Split screens showing Amara's journey from defendant to judge. The slap that changed everything. The title appeared over dramatic music as the video opened with Amara walking into the courthouse that morning. Young. Confident. Carrying herself like someone with a secret. Cut to Daniels in the witness stand, lying under oath with practiced ease. Cut to Amara's methodical destruction of his testimony. Cut to his explosion of rage and violence. Cut to the silence that followed. Cut to Judge Morrison's announcement that shattered reality. The editing was masterful. Each cut building tension. Each angle revealing new details. Each replay adding layers to the story. TikTok creators turned it into art. POV, you spent 7 years becoming a judge just to destroy the cop who tried to ruin your life. The sound of the gavel striking became a trending audio clip, used in thousands of videos about justice, revenge, and comeuppance. When karma has a law degree. This is what playing the long game looks like. She didn't just win. She orchestrated a masterpiece. YouTube analysis videos dissected every second. The psychology of Judge Johnson's perfect revenge, how she planned this for 7 years. Legal expert reacts to the most satisfying courtroom moment ever recorded. Breaking down the body language, watch Daniels realize his career is over. Each video racked up millions of views. Each comment section became a therapy session for people who'd never seen justice served so completely. The cinematography was perfect. The courtroom lighting created natural drama. The camera angles captured every emotion. The audio picked up every gasp, every whisper, every crack in Daniel's voice. It looked like a movie because reality had finally delivered what movies only promised. International news outlets treated it like a cultural phenomenon. The most watched courtroom video in internet history. How one judge's perfect justice became a global symbol. The moment that redefined what accountability looks like. Documentary filmmakers scrambled to secure rights to the full story. Publishers offered seven-figure book deals. Screenwriters pitched biopics. But the most powerful legacy was visual. The image of Amara in her black robes, gavel raised, delivering justice with surgical precision became iconic. Memes proliferated. Judge Johnson raising her gavel became the universal symbol for consequences incoming. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works, over Daniel's confused face. I am the danger, with Amara's calm expression during the confrontation. But it wasn't just memes. It was inspiration. Law schools reported record applications from black women. I want to be like Judge Johnson. She showed me what's possible. If she can turn trauma into triumph, so can I. The visual narrative was perfect. David and Goliath with briefcases and gavels. The underdog who played the ultimate long game. The victim who became the victor through intelligence, perseverance, and flawless execution. Art students painted portraits. Murals appeared on buildings. Street artists created installations showing the transformation from handcuffed teenager to robed judge. The visual storytelling was so powerful because it was true. No CGI. No scripted dialogue. No hired actors. Just raw, unfiltered justice served at the perfect temperature. The cinematic quality came from Amara herself. Her composure under assault. Her surgical precision in dismantling lies. Her calm authority while delivering judgment. She didn't perform justice. She was justice. And the cameras captured every frame of perfection. Netflix announced a limited series. HBO greenlit a documentary. Paramount secured film rights. But everyone knew the reality was better than any adaptation could be. Because the real footage had something no movie could manufacture. Truth. The satisfaction of watching actual corruption meet actual consequences. The catharsis of witnessing real victims get real justice. The hope of seeing one woman's perfect plan executed flawlessly in real time. The video became more than viral content. It became visual proof that the system could work when the right person held power. That justice wasn't dead. That accountability was possible. That sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. And they do it with style, grace, and perfect cinematography. The slap that was meant to silence her became the moment that amplified her voice to the entire world. The assault that was meant to put her in her place became the catalyst that elevated her to legendary status. The corruption that was meant to remain hidden became the evidence that destroyed its perpetrator. Perfect cinema. Perfect justice. Perfect revenge. All captured in perfect clarity for the world to see. The legacy wasn't just legal. It was visual poetry written in pixels and played on repeat until justice felt real again. 1 year later, Judge Amara Johnson sat in her chambers, looking out at the same courthouse steps where she'd once been dragged away in handcuffs. The irony was perfect. Poetic. Divine. On her desk lay the morning's headlines. Daniel sentenced to 15 years for civil rights violations. FBI corruption probe expands to 47 officers. Judge Johnson's court leads nation in wrongful conviction reversals. She smiled, tracing her finger across the wood grain of the desk where she now wrote history instead of being crushed by it. The transformation was complete, but the revolution was just beginning. In the past 12 months, her courtroom had become ground zero for justice restoration. 63 wrongful convictions overturned. 47 corrupt officers investigated. Hundreds of families reunited with loved ones who'd been stolen by systematic lies. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers. It was in the precedent. Every corrupt cop in America now knew that their past could come back to haunt them. That their victims might study law. That their lies might face scrutiny from someone who understood the system better than they did. The fear had shifted sides. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Marcus Williams entered, no longer the terrified 17-year-old from that courtroom. Now 18, college-bound, carrying acceptance letters from Harvard, Yale, and Stanford. Your Honor, I wanted to thank you before I leave for school. Amara gestured for him to sit. Marcus, you never need to thank me. You were innocent. I just made sure the truth came out. But you saved my life. If you hadn't been there that day. If I hadn't been there, another judge would have seen through Daniel's lies eventually. Truth has a way of surfacing. She leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. But Marcus, here's what I want you to remember. I didn't save you by being in that courtroom. I saved you by spending 7 years preparing to be in that courtroom. The moment you walk out those doors, you have a choice. You can be grateful for what happened, or you can be prepared for what's next. Marcus nodded, understanding flickering in his young eyes. Justice isn't about one moment of triumph. It's about building systems that prevent the need for triumph. After he left, Amara returned to the window. The late afternoon sun painted the courthouse in golden light, transforming the building that had once housed her nightmares into something beautiful. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking, President signs Judge Johnson prison reform bill into law. The legislation she drafted during late-night sessions was now federal law. Mandatory body cameras. Independent oversight of police testimony. Automatic review of convictions involving officers with complaint histories. Daniel's corruption had accidentally triggered the most comprehensive police reform in decades. Her personal victory had become systemic change. The same courthouse where she'd been brutalized now bore a bronze plaque. In dedication to all who seek justice through knowledge, perseverance, and unwavering faith in the possibility of change. May this court serve truth above all else. Visitors came from around the world to see her courtroom. Law students studied her cases. Legal scholars wrote papers about the Johnson Doctrine, the systematic use of constitutional law to dismantle corruption. But the real legacy lived in the people who'd found hope again. The families who'd been reunited. The young people who'd chosen law school over resignation. The communities that believed in justice again. As evening fell, Amara prepared to leave her chambers. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that the system could work when operated by people who remembered what it felt like to be powerless. She locked her desk, straightened her robes, and walked through the courthouse one final time. Past the courtroom where she'd been assaulted and ascended. Past the gallery where her victims had finally found their voices. Past the witness stand where corruption had been exposed and destroyed. As she pushed open the courthouse doors, Amara paused on the steps where her journey had begun 7 years ago. The girl who'd entered this building in handcuffs was gone. In her place stood something the system had never anticipated, a black woman with ultimate authority, perfect preparation, and an unshakable commitment to justice. She looked up at the inscription carved above the courthouse entrance. Equal justice under law. For the first time in her life, those words felt true. Because now she was the law. And under her watch, justice would finally be equal. The transformation was complete. The revolution had won. And tomorrow, she would continue rewriting the rules of a system that had tried to destroy her. One case at a time. One precedent at a time. One perfectly delivered judgment at a time. Justice was no longer blind. It was watching. And it was wearing black robes. Drop a comment if you think more corrupt officers need to face what Daniels faced, because stories like this only spread when people like you make sure they're seen. Justice was no longer blind. It was watching. And it was wearing black robes. If stories like this move you, help them reach further. Subscribe for more stories of justice reclaimed. Like if you believe truth always finds the light. Share so more people see that corruption can be defeated.